Root and branch reform. We hear that phrase all the time, right? Especially when we're talking about huge institutions like the police. But what does it actually mean? Well, in this explainer, we're going to dig into a really powerful way of thinking about change. One that argues if you're not looking at the soil, you're missing the entire point.
So let's just start with a question that, I'm sure, we've all asked ourselves at some point. Some big institution announces this massive overhaul, a brand new plan for reform. And then, a year later, it feels like absolutely nothing has changed. Why does that happen? Why do the real core issues just never seem to get fixed?
And this right here perfectly illustrates the typical response. We see these proposals to, say, merge police forces, or invest in some fancy new technology, or just restructure a few departments. The sources we're looking at today call these leaf-level fixes. And it makes sense, right? They're visible, they look decisive, but they're only really dealing with the surface of the problem.
So, to get past those surface fixes, you need a much better diagnostic tool. And that's where this first big idea comes in, the bias impact tree. Think of it as a new way to see what's really going on, to look past the obvious stuff and understand the hidden architecture of these problems.
Now, what's so great about this is the metaphor itself. It's so simple and powerful. It separates all the issues into different layers, just like a real tree. You've got the leaves up top. Those are the visible symptoms that everyone's always talking about. But then underneath, you have the roots in the soil. And that's where the hidden causes are, where the real problems are being fed.
So, let's actually break this down. To really get how this model works, we've got to look at each of its three parts one by one: the leaves, the roots, and the soil.
Okay, first up, the leaves. This is the stuff you can't miss. It's the most obvious layer of the tree, representing the problems that make the headlines, the things that are easiest for all of us to see and, complain about.
So what are these leaf-level issues? Well, they're the classics. Things like having a bunch of separate police forces that just don't talk to each other, outdated tech that makes everything inefficient, constant battles over funding, and maybe the biggest, most visible leaf of all, that steady, deep erosion of public trust. But here's the key thing to remember. These are just the symptoms, not the actual disease.
So let's dig a little deeper, shall we? Down to the roots. Now this layer, this is all about the internal structures, the organizational culture. It's the hidden framework inside the institution where systemic problems, like bias, really get locked in place and sustained.
And here's what those roots look like in the real world. You've got these bureaucratic silos where different departments refuse to share information. You have outdated systems that are just not fit for purpose anymore. Sometimes a really toxic or dysfunctional internal culture where bad behavior just gets a pass. Chronic shortages of resources. And a system of fractured accountability where, when something goes wrong, nobody is ever truly responsible. See, these roots are what feed all those visible problems we see in the leaves.
Okay, now we get to the deepest, most fundamental layer of all, the soil. And this is interesting because this isn't even really about the institution itself. It's about the historical and cultural environment it grew out of. These are the deep-seated beliefs and the societal narratives that nourish the entire system from the ground up.
So the soil is made up of these huge, historical things. The legacy of racialized policing, for example. The deep-seated mistrust that exists between institutions and certain communities. A profound disconnection from the very people they're supposed to serve. And it also includes these broader mindsets, like a tough-on-crime mentality, and the fundamental racial and power imbalances that have existed for generations.
The source material puts it this way, and wow, it's a powerful idea. You can't build justice on contaminated soil. That one sentence really just captures the entire argument, doesn't it? If the very ground the tree is growing in is unhealthy, no amount of fiddling with the leaves and branches is ever going to create a healthy tree.
Okay, so the tree shows us what the problem is in all its layers. But that leads to the next big question, right? How can we tell if an organization is even ready or willing to change in the first place? And that brings us to our second framework, a tool designed specifically for diagnosing an institution's mindset. It's called the 6 Stages Framework, or SSF. The easiest way to think about it is as a diagnostic roadmap. It doesn't just describe the problem, it actually helps us measure an organization's readiness to tackle it. It maps their mindset on this whole spectrum, from deep, deep denial all the way to genuine transformation. So here's a quick look at how the framework is put together. It's basically broken into 3 big categories. On the negative end, you find mindsets of resistance, denial, or maybe just doing the bare minimum, tokenism. That's an organization that is not ready for real change. Then you've got this neutral middle, stage 0, where an organization is just stuck. They're overwhelmed.
And then finally, on the positive side, you can see a real journey starting to emerge, from courageous learning to structural repair and eventually to real transformation. The whole point is to figure out where an institution is and help move it along that path.
So, let's bring these two incredible ideas together now. When you use the bias impact tree and the 6 stages framework, you can finally start to get a clear picture of what real, meaningful transformation actually looks like.
And this slide just lays out the core difference perfectly. On one side, you've got reorganization. It's all about changing the structure, shuffling roles around, making things more efficient. In other words, you're just treating the leaves and branches. But on the other side, you have transformation. And that focuses on the culture, the values, the deep-seated beliefs. It is all about healing the roots and the soil.
So, here it is, the crucial point of this whole thing. If you only reorganize, you're not actually solving the problem. The sources we've looked at argue that just rearranging the structure without changing the culture, well, you risk just moving the bias around. You'll get new departments with the same old problems, because the roots and the soil were never, ever treated.
Which brings us right back to where we started. The phrase root and branch reform sounds good. It implies this deep, fundamental change. But this framework forces us to ask a really tough question. When we demand it, are we, and are our institutions, truly willing to do the incredibly hard work of actually looking at the soil?